Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a trip down memory lane. More specifically, we are going to be revisiting the 2009 US Chess Championship. For those of you guys who are watching this video and are fairly new to chess or weren't following chess, 14 long years ago, I very recently won Norway chess. More specifically, in the final round game against Fabiano Caruana, I used an idea in the fried liver or the anti-fried liver to win a critical game, to win the whole tournament. So let's jump right into the action. So here we go. US Championship 2009. Before we get into the game itself, it's worth pointing out that this event was very special for many reasons. First and foremost, this was the first time that the US Championship was held in St. Louis, and it has been held there ever since. So 14 years strong and still going. Additionally, this is the first tournament that I played in where I had a trainer who accompanied me to the tournament. That, of course, would be Christopher Littlejohn. Now, I've spoken about him a little bit here and there in videos and interviews, everything else, but Chris is somebody who I started working with over the internet. More specifically, in the year 2005, I worked with him for the first time for a tournament which I played in Nagorno-Karabakh, the disputed region between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Additionally, it's worth noting that from that tournament which I played in Armenia, I gained 5 FIDE rating points, but that tournament was never rated. So if FIDE were to retroactively go back and rate that tournament, my rating would actually be even higher now than it currently is. But alas, most likely it never will be rated for FIDE purposes. Nonetheless, Chris is someone that I worked with over the internet in the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006, 7, 8. But in 2009, going to the US Championship was the first time that we decided to travel together. He came to the tournament. He drove in his rickety old car from Dallas, Texas to St. Louis, Missouri. And he also lugged his desktop computer. So he lugged this tower, put it in his car, brought it to St. Louis. We stayed at the downtown Hilton Hotel. And that was the setup. Now, of course, nowadays you would laugh. It's like, oh man, you're bringing a desktop? Well, just use cloud. But back in 2009, cloud did not exist. Programs were not the way that they are today. So Chris lugged his computer all the way there, and the tournament was off to the races. So in the tournament, it was 24 rounds, or 24 players, I should say, with 9 rounds of play, meaning that the winner from the tournament, essentially an open or Swiss format, would become the US champion. Now, that is much different from today when the format is a round robin event. You have 10, 11, 12, sometimes 14 players like last year who compete for the title. At any rate, it was a very solid event. I started out with a pretty good score. I think I got to something like 4.5 points out of 7, 4 out of 7 points. 5 out of 7 points, I should say. And in the 8th round, I was tied for the lead with none other than Robert Hess. Now, many of you guys know Mr. Robert Hess, Can't Spell Chess Without Hess, from chess.com commentary and other videos. Now, Robert, actually going to the US Championship, was fresh off winning the National High School Championships. So what does that mean? That means that he won the tournament featuring the best players in 11th and 12th grade throughout the country. And he went from that to playing in the US Championship. So he went from beating up high schoolers to playing against the absolute best players in the country. Now, Robert was very hot at the time, playing really good chess. He actually was keeping pace with me throughout the tournament. So going into the 8th round, we both had 5 points out of 7. And I actually had the black piece against Michael Brooks, and I am from Missouri itself. I won that game, but to my horror, Robert Hess was playing with the white piece against Yuri Shulman. And true to Robert's fashion, or Robert's, I guess, style, I should say, Robert played the exchange French against Yuri Shulman, another GM, and he won the game with the white piece in a very drawish middle game and end game. As such, going to the final round, Robert and I both had 6 points out of 8, and we were tied for the lead. Behind us was Varuzhin Akobian on 5.5, Alexander Onishuk, and of course Gata Kamsky. Now, round number 9, I was playing with the white pieces against Joshua Friedel, and Robert had the white pieces against Varuzhin Akobian. As such, I had played against Joshua Friedel many times when I was much younger, and I know that I'm going on a little bit with the story. But I played Joshua Friedel many times when I was younger. I'd struggled. He was at a very solid repertoire. And I remember the night before the event, around 10:30, 11 p.m., I decided to go to bed. And I told Chris that essentially just come up with something in the morning. Come up with some idea. I don't know what it is. Spend the whole night, do the preparation, and I will just play your idea. And of course, Chris did not disappoint me then, much as he has not disappointed me over the last 14 plus years. So let's get into the action. So game starts with e4. I have the white pieces. Josh plays e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, and now we get knight to f6. And of course I play knight g5. Now at the time the fried liver was well known, but generally this idea with knight g5 was not considered very effective, because after d5 and takes, knight to a5, the main line at the time was bishop to b5, c6, takes, and bishop e2. And after bishop e2 and h6, black is considered to be doing very, very well here. It's worth noting that even before the game, even before I played the game, Josh had also played this line with b5, so there's no guarantee that I was going to get knight to a5. Nonetheless, Josh does play knight a5. Of course, as everybody knows, after knight takes d5, knight f7, king f7, queen f3, king to e6. This is what we call the classic fried liver. And after knight c3, knight c to e7, d4, white is supposed to be winning according to the latest theoretical knowledge. As such, this is why nobody goes into this variation anymore, and they nowadays mostly play knight to a5. And after bishop b5, c6, takes, I played this move bishop to d3. Now, I'm not 100% sure what the inspiration behind this idea was from Chris. I think the way that he reached this conclusion was that he had seen one top-level game that was played by the famous Russian grandmaster Alexander Morozevich. Now, that was the only top-level game in the database. It was not played by pretty much anyone. I honestly want to, if I were to venture a guess, there probably were not more than 10 total games in this position at the time. Now, of course, once I played this line bishop to d3, it became a very popular topical line, and now I think there's somewhere north of 1,000 or even maybe 2,000 games in the database. There's a lot of theory in this position. But at the time this was not known. There was the one game that Moro had played in this position, and as such, Chris thought it was a very good idea, because without knowing what to do here, it's not obvious what black should do. If you look at this position without any of the theoretical knowledge, you'll think, well, wait, white has this bishop on d3, so the bishop blocks the bishop. But how do you take advantage of it? What exactly is the best idea? Now, without knowing, if you were to consider a move like knight d5 without any knowledge, it looks quite scary after a move like queen to h5 potentially, or even knight to f3. What are you doing here? If you go bishop d6, castles, and say white goes rook to e1 and you play rook to e8, after knight c3, white is a little bit better here, because when black plays f5, you can simply go bishop to f1. You have ideas like d3 or d4. So what do you do? With no knowledge, a completely fresh position, it's very easy to go wrong right away. Now in this position, Josh decides to play the move bishop e7. Now nowadays we do know that after knight d5, knight f3, bishop d6, castles, and rook to e1, black can actually play f5, and it's a very, very sharp line with knight takes e5, queen f6, knight f3, and g5. Or additionally, black can also play the move knight to f4, like our classic fried Fabiano. And after rook to e1, knight takes d3, c takes d3, castles, and knight c3, we end up back in the game that I had against Fabiano in Norway chess. But at the time, none of this was known. This was simply an unknown variation, fresh sort of ideas, and we'll see who the better player is. Now here Josh played bishop to e7, I play knight to c3, he castles, and I castle, and here we get this very unusual looking move, which is rook to b8. Now again, it's very easy to look at this game in the present time in the year 2023 and think, well, man, these are such bad moves. How does GM play moves like rook to b8? I mean, what is the idea? Obviously, you should play for c5 and knight c6. But again, without this knowledge, it's very, very hard to figure out what to do on the spot. And Chris correctly predicted that Josh would be very unfamiliar and would not feel comfortable, because even though black is down a pawn here, it feels like there should be something very obvious, but you don't know what it is. And rook b8 is exactly that idea, which is Josh thought here he was going to bring the rook to b4, maybe swing the rook to h4, simply underestimating my play. Now again, it's very hard to be critical, because in order to try and push something in the center of the board, the only logical way to do that is to play something like h6. But after knight to f3, for example, your pawn on e5 is weak, and after bishop d6, it feels like after rook e1 and rook d8, for example, white can go b3 and bishop b2. You're not really able to push the pawns in the center of the board. Maybe you can play a move like knight to d5 here, but after bishop b2, if you try to go f5 with the idea of e4, I can simply trade the horses and take the pawn on e5, and I'm simply up 2 pawns here, and black has no attack in the center of the board. So it's very, very difficult to figure it out over the board without knowledge. But this is also why I very frequently make the joke that computers have ruined chess, because I do feel that we as humans, if you see this position with no knowledge, without all the games that have been played since the year 2009, it's very hard. I think that generally speaking, a top GM would say that they really like white's position. They think white should win most of the time from this position. But again, that pesky little thing called computer engines have basically shown us that black is doing completely fine in most of these variations. Now it's worth noting, also just going back a move, that if black were to play h6, knight to f3, There is this line with castles, and after black plays a move like bishop d6, rook e1, rook e8, b3, maybe black can play something like c5 and bishop b7 to activate the bishop. But again, it feels very awkward when you're down a pawn here because you feel like there has to be something straightforward to attack and go forward, but it simply does not exist in this position. So back to the game, we get rook to b8 being played by Josh, and now I play h3. Now this move is maybe not the best move. Of course, it's many years ago, so I don't remember my exact logic behind playing h3, but I think what I felt was quite simple. After rook to b8, what is Josh doing here? Is he really going to bring the rook to h4? Is that really his idea? And when I go h3, there are a couple things in my mind. First and foremost, I prevent bishop g4 in one go. Now, it's not necessarily that I'm worried about bishop g4 right away, but it's more that, say black were to play a move like h6, I can now go knight to f3, targeting the pawn on e5, and black cannot play bishop g4 because the pawn on h3 prevents this move. So first of all, it stops bishop g4. Additionally, if black does try to bring the rook to b4 in this position, after say knight to f3, no bishop g4, and let's say we get bishop d6 and I play a move like a3, where is this rook going? Your rook can't go to h4, it can't go to g4. I mean, maybe you can go to f4, but again, after say rook e1 followed by g3, this rook is really loose here on f4, so the rook simply loses squares with the pawn being on h3. Whereas even if you don't have bishop g4, say I play a move like, I don't know, let's say b3, rook b4, a3, rook to g4, for example. Now after knight to f3, e4, suddenly white's in trouble. And even if I were to play, let's just say rook e1, rook b4, not rook b3, obviously, a3, rook g4, knight to f3, maybe black can go c5 and bishop b7, opening up the diagonal. So h6 is sort of a very prophylactic move. It stops bishop g4, it stops rook b4 and rook g4. Additionally, it creates a lift for the king on the h2 square as well, so there are no ice skater checkmates down the road. So I play h3. Josh plays c5 here, finally trying to open up the scope for the light square bishop on this long diagonal. Here I go b3, which stops c4, but additionally I prepare to develop my dark square bishop to either the b2 or the a3 square. So Josh goes rook b4 here, and this is sort of the start of the end for Josh. I think that in this position he felt very uncomfortable. He felt that in this position he's down a pawn here, and he can see the writing on the wall, which is that if you play a move like bishop b7 and we get rook e1, bishop d6, and bishop b2, suddenly white has completed the development here. Let's just say black goes rook e8. Now you can go knight to e4. The bishops are developed because now the bishop on d3 is perfectly placed on diagonal, and you found a way to activate the dark square bishop. The biggest drawback in general in chess when you put a bishop, say, in front of a pawn on d2 or e2 for that matter, is that you can't develop a bishop on this diagonal. But once we get to this position where I'm able to put the bishop on b2, now the bishop on d3 is perfectly placed on the diagonal, the other bishop is active, and now it doesn't really matter that this bishop is in front of these pawns on c2 and d2 because the other bishop is active, and with white simply up a pawn here, white is doing very well. So at this point, I think Josh is feeling very uncomfortable. He thinks, wait a second, white's on the brink of finishing the development. There's rook e1, bishop b2, etc., and because of that, he felt this urge to try and create something immediately by playing this move rook to b4. After rook to b4 is played, though, I simply play rook to e1, targeting the pawn on e5. Now again, there are no moves involving the g4 square. You cannot go bishop g4, and you cannot play rook g4 either. Josh plays bishop to b7 here, and now I play this move bishop to a3, a very thematic move, sort of shades of my game against Fabiano, where I also put this bishop on a3 in the recent Norway chess event. Josh goes rook to f4 here, and now I play g3. Now, it looks a little bit scary playing g3, but as long as black cannot use this long diagonal and create the double A battery threat with the queen and the bishop, then I don't mind opening up this diagonal. Additionally, it's a very critical moment because c5 is weak, e5 is weak, and if black doesn't get something immediately, white is probably just going to be winning. So after g3, Josh plays rook to d4, and now I go knight to f3 back, attacking the rook on d4 and the pawn on e5. Here, Josh decides to sack the rook with rook takes d3. It's worth noting that if you play bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, because white is up a pawn, I'm very happy to trade pieces here. As long as black cannot attack in the center of the board, all trades favor me. So I go knight to f3, Josh sacks the rook. Apparently the computer thinks that after knight to c6, it's actually not so clear what's going on, because if I take the rook on d4, after knight takes d4, suddenly there are big threats with knight to f3 and forks abound here. And if I play a move like knight to e4 after queen to a8, black has a lot of counterplay. Now the computer says that after c3, knight takes e4, takes, and bishop to h1, threatening the mate on g2. A very cool little idea that after f3 bishop takes f3 and queen c2, white is better here. Nonetheless, after black plays e4, it's really murky, because if I go bishop takes c5, there's this wild idea with bishop to h4, because if I take the bishop, now there's queen b8, and I actually can't stop the checkmate on this long diagonal. Now, of course, very hard to spot any of this during game, but it's amazing all the resources that do exist, even when it looks really bad. Of course, Josh, being a human, decides to sack the rook with rook takes d3. I take back, and here he plays queen takes d3, which is a mistake. What he should have played here was this quiet move queen to d7, trying to attack both the pawns on d3 and h3 while creating the classic 90-degree right triangle. Now in this position, if white goes knight takes e5, after queen takes h3, there are all kinds of problems. There are mate threats on g2 and h1, and if you go knight to f3, now suddenly after knight to g4, or actually knight g4 apparently doesn't work, so you hang the bishop. Maybe knight c6 first with the idea of knight d4 and knight g4. These knights are very active, and black is very much in the game. In fact, computer says that it's zeros, which means that white probably has some way to save the game, but black's going to be getting a raging attack here. So queen d7 would be a better move. Instead, Josh decides to play the move queen takes d3. Now again, hard to fault him, because he probably figures that here by taking, after knight takes e5, he can go queen to f5, and it's basically the same situation where he's grabbed the pawn on d3 in return for the pawn on e5, and he's still keeping an eye on the pawn on h3, has ideas like queen f3, knight e4 still exists, and it feels like black is maybe okay. But black is not okay, because here white can play g4 like I play in the game, and now black has problems. Because ideally you want to keep the queen on g5 or f4, but this is a mistake, as we'll see in the game. And if you go queen c8, which is retreating the queen, now after d4, you can't really line up this battery very quickly. Very quickly, I'm going to trade the dark square bishops, and black just doesn't have a lot of play here. For example, say you play a move like knight c6 trying to trade off the knight. Now I can trade the knights and go d5, closing off the diagonal here. And after queen d6, let's just say a move like queen f3 followed by rook a d1, white is simply winning. One sample line would be knight takes d5, which would lose on the spot to rook takes e7, because if you take the rook, you lose the bishop. Simply have an extra bishop on a3 here. And if you play queen takes rook, now after knight takes d5, let's just say queen e5. There are many ways for white to win, but probably simplest is rook to d1, and when black tries to pin the knight on d5 here, white can simply go knight to e7, queen takes e7, trade the rooks, and then take the bishop. And once again, white simply has this extra bishop on the board and should win very soon. So queen c8 is very passive, doesn't feel right. So here Josh plays queen to f4, trying to keep the queen very active, maybe access to e4, f3, maybe some kind of sack on g4, maybe queen to h6 as well. Here I play the move d4, which is a very strong move, because in this position the main issue that white has is my king is a little bit weak, because I push these pawns, and I have these pieces, the rook and the bishop, that are sort of a little bit off sides. So when I go d4, what I'm trying to do here is maybe trade some dark square bishops, but additionally I open up this diagonal for the bishop to retreat to c1. So here Josh goes rook to d8, and now I play this move queen to e2, which is a very slippery and tricky move, which effectively ends the game here, because now the only move for black that doesn't lose on the spot is queen to h6, targeting the pawn on h3. But after queen to h6, I can simply go queen to e3, offering the trade of the queens while also guarding the pawn on h3. And if black plays a move like, let's just say queen to h4, I can go bishop takes c5, trade the bishops, and black has no threats. The knight takes g4 doesn't work, because I play knight takes g4. And if you play a move like, let's just say h5 here, I can probably play something like queen to g3. If you trade, I simply am up a rook for a knight in the endgame. And if you go queen to g5 here, I can play f4, queen to h6, and now g5, forking the queen and the knight. So after queen to e3, black is basically lost, but nonetheless, this is what Josh should have done. Instead, Josh plays the move rook takes d4 here, overlooking a very basic tactic, which is this move bishop to c1, retreating the bishop and trapping the queen on f4. So here Josh basically is going to lose his Pokemon. There's nothing he can do about it. If you go to f5, I take the queen. If you go on the diagonal, I take the queen. So none of these squares are available. If you go to e4, I gobble with the knight. If you go to f3, I gobble with the other knight, and it's just totally hopeless. So in this position, Josh Friedel ends up resigning the game against me, and I win my game to get to a score of 7 out of 9. Now, in the meantime, I get to 7 out of 9, but of course, Robert Hess is still playing his game against Varuzhin Akobian. Luckily for me, I saw the position, and it looked pretty drawish, didn't look like a whole lot was going on. Varuzhin was able to draw the game against Robert, which meant that with 7 points out of 9, I won the US Championship by a half point ahead of Robert, ahead of Alexander Onishuk and Gada Kamsky. I think they won their games, if I'm not mistaken. So I won the event half point ahead of Robert, which means that I won $40,000 in cash. I won my second US championship, but most importantly, this ring, which I wear to this day on my hand, I won as well by winning the championship. Now, those of you guys who've watched a lot of top level tournaments, you'll probably have noticed that Wesley So has continued this tradition. He does wear, I think he only wears one of them because wearing more would be a little bit garish and too ostentatious at any rate. So Wesley also wears one of his US championship rings, but the reason that I wear this ring is that it was very pivotal in terms of my career. First of all, it was my second US championship. It's also when I was able to stabilize above 2,700, and I do firmly believe that with that result in the US championship, it led to a lot of the support from Rex Sinkfield towards chess in St. Louis in the preceding years. I think that's correct if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the right word, in the preceding years. So very pivotal after this tournament. I would go on to San Sebastian, where I would win another very important round robin tournament. I won a tiebreaker against Ruslan Ponomarev. It was a tournament that had a couple other 2,700 players, and from there on, as the saying goes, the rest is history. I continue to improve and break into the top 20, top 10. So I feel like the US championship was the jet fuel that really inspired me, and from there it was all uphill, which is why I wear this ring to this day, because I look back on those times. Also, you know, just to point it out, when I won the US championship, I think I've said this story on stream before, maybe I haven't, but when I won the US championship, the way that I celebrated after winning the US championship, because it was a very foreign feeling at the time, winning an event like this, was I went back to the hotel. I think I had a couple of brewskis with Chris, and we went to White Castle and we got a crave pack. So that was the way of celebrating when I won the 2009 US Championship. A couple of brewskis as well as a White Castle crate pack. Hashtag not an ad, but that's how I celebrated winning. Also, for anybody who's a fan of Nightwish, you will be thrilled to hear that when Chris and I would drive over from the downtown area where the Hilton was over to the Central West End in St. Louis, to the chess club there, we would always be blasting Last of the Wilds by Nightwish before every single round. That was the way that I would get in the zone before every single game. So once again, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. A lot of anecdotes, very heavy on the history, but I feel like it's a very relevant video to make, also because of the game. It's so similar to the game which I won against Fabiano. I played the exact same line nearly 14 years to the day from when I played it in 2009 and won the US Championship. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you haven't, and we'll be back soon with some more great YouTube only content. See you guys. Bye.